Caponi, author of The Transparency Sale and The Transparent Sales Leader. And the best advice I ever got is actually advice I'd read. If the truth won't sell it, don't sell it.
Todd, that's great advice, man. If the truth won't sell, don't sell it. So where'd you read that, man?
Well, I'm my nerdery knows no bounds. But this one was a quote that I had read from a book by a guy named Arthur Dunn. The year was 1918. The book is Scientific Selling and Advertising. He's got this whole rant about honesty in sales that is so freaking awesome. But he starts with, like, if the truth won't sell it, don't sell it. And then his next line is something like, a lie is a tool of the weak and afraid. And, like, as somebody who has written a couple of books, I'll tell you, like, one quick little rant. There was a article that came out that listed, like, the top 100 sales books of all time. And, like, I was honored. My book was in it. And I was actually, like, I was part honored and part angry because, man, they could write back then. Like, my book is it's no business being in there. And the rant, like, anger was that, like, I think it was 89 books on that list were written in the last 10 years. And I'm like, these books from the early 1900s are fantastic. And that piece of advice, like that quote, just punched me in the face.
Wow. So okay, so let's talk about that, and then we'll talk a lot about your book, man. So I gotta ask you, where the hell do you find these old books, man? Like, honestly, I go to the bookstore, right? I see, to your point, right? Last 5 years books. Where do you get these, bro?
Well, this one, so this is where it started. This book was written in 1947. It's called The 5 Great Rules of Selling. It's by a guy named Percy Whiting. I found it and I read it and I was like, and you'll see that it's all tabbed up and everything.
Yeah.
And I was like, gosh, it's fascinating. I could literally take paragraphs from that, plop it into LinkedIn today. And people would be like, wow, that's brilliant. And they would have no idea that it's that old. But the thing that's more interesting to me is this Percy Whiting kept referencing old books, like from the 30s and even the 20s. And I'm like, I wonder if those are around. So I start pounding eBay. There's a site called abebooks.com. And even Amazon's got reprints of old books. And so I just kept going back and like found a treasure trove of stuff. And, like, now I'm an addict. I mean, like, when cool people are doing cool things on the weekends, I'm reading books from, like, 1908 on sales. Like, that's my nerdery. So I love
awesome. Well, I think it's important to be a student of sales, man. I mean, if we want to be good, like really good, nothing new is under the sun. I mean, Napoleon Hill, right, is the grandfather of positive thinking, and I would argue probably networking, right? I mean, Dale Carnegie, all those guys, right? That's old stuff, and yet that's still super relevant. So, but I gotta ask, man, because I went to my dad's closet up at the farmhouse, right, and I saw my uncle went. I think he went to the local community college and has like a sales book from 57, and I gotta tell you, dude, it's not any good. Like, I'm not impressed with it.
Right.
So tell me, like, what, for you anyway, what makes a good sales book?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, when you look at even Napoleon Hill and Carnegie stuff, like, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I could literally take paragraphs from books of the early 1900s and put it together into that book. Now, that book is fantastic and it's timeless, but the stuff that they used to write about back in the early 1900s, that was foundational. Like, if you think about modern sales to me really started with companies like NCR, National Cash Register, and Burroughs Adding Machine, and these companies in, like, 1890s that said, hey, listen, that old world of bagmen and drummers that used to be like what we call today manufacturers reps, where you had something to sell, you'd hire these guys that were crawling across the country with briefcases and slapping backs and drinking hard. NCR, Burroughs, those companies, they were the ones that said, hey, wait, we now have access to transportation. We've got a product that we can actually run the territories on. And so let's hire salespeople. Let's train them. And then they were the kind of the pioneers of variable compensation plans and dedicated territories. And then all of a sudden from there, like if you look at the most prolific writers of the late 1800s, early 1900s on sales, they started in NCR. And so when I look at that foundational stuff, I mean, first of all, they could write, like the way they articulated, and like they wrote to a point where you felt like you were there. And there's times where, excuse me, well, lost my voice. There's times where I would read a paragraph and I'd be like, wait, I got to stop. Like I got tears in my eyes. That's great writing, man. And you're right. Like this book from 1947 is not what I would consider one of the top books by any means. But the ones, there's guys like Arthur Sheldon and Worthington Holman and like Arthur Dunn I mentioned, and Norris Briscoe. These guys could write. They structured their arguments really well. It's just, it's amazing to me that I can go through a book and go, holy cow, I didn't want to put this thing down.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Well, I would, I guess I'm more Nick Wright in the fact that I think of the top 50 books in the last, let's say 25 years, 30 years, right? I mean, maybe even 50 years, right? I mean, the first book that I remember enjoying. Now being said, since then I've read How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? I've read, some of the classics, but the first book I remember enjoying was Tom Peters and Bob Waterman writing In Search of Excellence.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to go back. We'll talk offline. I want to hear some of those top 10 from you, man, because that's really cool. And go ahead.
I had one thing. I wrote an article a few months ago, and it was beginning of the year, right? The beginning of the year, every year on LinkedIn, somebody publishes their list of the top 10 sales influencers you need to be following in 2022. I wrote the same article, but I did the top 5 influencers you need to be following in 1922. Right? So like 100 years ago, right? And so like I'll share that article with you, and we can include it. You can share it out if you'd like. But there's 5 that just, man, they could write, right? There's this guy Forbes Lindsay, who is known, like in the description of him from like the 1920s, they said it's not often that people are naming children after the titles of an individual's book. And that was Forbes Lindsay. Like that, and there's some people back then that were just unbelievable.
That's awesome. I can't wait to dive into that, man. I must have missed that when you put that out, because I certainly would have shared that. So I'll share it now, but that's really cool, man. So with that, your book is The Transparent Sales Leader. And I'll tell you, man, transparency is not a word that we hear a lot about anymore. We hear about vulnerability. We might hear about, challenging. So what the heck is transparency, Todd?
Well, at its core, and it was the foundation of the first book, was the story that came from my last role. I was the chief revenue officer of a company here in Chicago where I live. And I split time in Wisconsin. We were talking about that before we kicked off. But Power Reviews was in the business of helping retailers and brands collect and display ratings and reviews on their websites, right? So you've interacted with them before. You're buying a pair of Crocs or a sweater at Vineyard Vines. You probably look at the product, you read the reviews. Here's what happened. And it takes me right to the answer to your question. We did a research study with Northwestern University here that just looked at, all right, when a website's acting as a salesperson, what do people do? And as it turns out, we all read reviews, right? It was 99% of us when we're buying something we haven't bought before that's of medium to high consideration, like not a pack of gum, but something that matters. We read reviews first. No surprise. But the next 2 data points changed my life like it only happened to a nerd. Number 1 was that 85% of us go to the negative reviews first.
Yeah.
Right. So again, when left to our own devices and we want to go make a purchase, we skip the 5 stars and go right to the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s. So we all do that. And when a product on a 5-star scale has an average review score between a 4.2 and a 4.5, that's optimal for purchase conversion, meaning a product that has negative reviews right under it will sell at a higher rate, a higher conversion rate than a product that doesn't. That to me was like, all right, what? And so I'm running this sales organization, helping people sell online. And I'm like, all right, why does that happen? Why are we drawn to the negative? And could that apply to human or B2B? And I'm also a behavioral science nerd. Like I read secondary research. Like I'm crazy with that. I don't like reading current sales books. I like to come to my own conclusions. And so I start digging in and I figure out really quickly that, wait a second, that's how we're wired, that we need the negative to be able to process the positive. And so that kind of the concept of transparency goes back to the quote that I shared about the greatest sales advice is, if the truth won't sell it, don't sell it. But there's even more power in leading with what a potential buyer might not like, or what a competitor might do better, or hey, we're really expensive here, and if that's going to be a problem, let's get to that now, so that we would rather find out now versus later. And what ends up happening is, when you embrace transparency with all you do, where you're leading with the flaws, you're helping buyers buy more quickly, you're improving your win rate, partially because you're qualifying in faster, but partially because you're losing the deals you're going to lose anyway faster. And then you build trust and you make it really hard on your competitors to position against you. And that's that core, right? That 4-2 to 4-5. If the truth won't sell it, don't sell it. Lead with the negatives, and there's tremendous power. And I'll leave you with this one last point. And it's something I've been ranting about a lot lately, is we as human beings, we don't buy when we're convinced. Like maybe we do, and then we're pissed about it 20 minutes later. We buy when we can predict. Like that's the point. And sales, like we could tie this all the way back to history. Sales is about helping the buyer predict, helping the buyer achieve outcomes, whether it's with you or with somebody else, as quickly as possible. And transparency is a really powerful vessel to do that.
Wow. So what you say makes total sense, right? I mean, I will tell you, I'm looking for that, because I'm looking for, what's bad. Like, for instance, I'll tell you, until recently, I didn't have kids. So I've got a 6-year-old and a 15-year-old now. But I used to look for restaurants that people would say, this place is not kid friendly.
Right.
Because I don't want to go somewhere that has a bunch of little munchkins running around. Like, I want somewhere that I can sit and actually listen to the person across the table from me with, right? Especially for a business appointment, that's super important to me. So that makes super sense, right? And I'm not talking McDonald's, because if I'm just driving through, I don't care.
Right.
But if it's a good meal, right, I totally want that. And to that point, I mean, about cars, right, I could go on and on about things that just make sense to me with that. But how does that connect to leadership, man? Like, are we supposed to be that emperor that has clothes on? Like, I'll tell you, I'm not detail oriented. That's not my gift, man. My gift is, I'm charismatic, I'm empathetic, right? I've got other gifts. There's a lot of stuff that's broken with me. I don't have time to go through that. This isn't therapy. But how does that relate to leaders, man? How do leaders be more transparent so that they can give that 4-3 to 4-2-5 to 4-5, right? How do they get more transparent, buddy?
Well, God, I mean, when you think through your past, right? Like, you probably don't want to run behind somebody who thinks they're perfect, right? That's just irritating, right? Like those people, you're just like, ugh. And then you don't want to run behind somebody who sucks either. Like that's, that doesn't even make sense. And so
Right.
like that when we think about that 4-2 to 4-5, I call into play the advice of a supermodel, because like, why wouldn't we? Tyra Banks, she coined the term flawsome. And flawsome is to embrace your flaws, but know that you're still awesome. And that kind of is that core. But from a leadership perspective, here's the thing. And really the lens by which this book is written is, listen, by playing your cards face up as a leader, to let people know how you run your business and like what you're looking for, and understanding, because like when we as individuals, we can predict and we know how we're being judged and measured, we do our best work that way. And it was one of the things that I had told my team back in 2009 when I first got promoted. I remember my CEO going, Todd, like, you're not their peer anymore, right? You're not their buddy. You're their boss. And like, you got to come strong. And I was like, dude, I can't do it. I can't do it. Maybe I'm going to suck at leadership. And I went to the team and I told them, listen, I am no more important than any of you. We are peers. We just have different responsibilities, right? My responsibility is to my CEO, our board, our investors, our forecast, and helping all of you be successful and achieve your career outcomes and clear the road of all the crap that gets in the way of you being able to do that. That's my job. And your job is X, right? We just have different jobs. Let's help each other. I believe that's transparency, right? Play your cards face up and go, this is the way that I think. This is the way that I do things. This is what I expect. Here's what I measure. And there's some things that I suck at, right? Like, and I'm going to need some help. When you do that, like, who doesn't want to run behind somebody like that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's so good. And such a great reminder, right? As we're leaders, if we're leading a sales team, we need to really be the one that says there's stuff that I'm not great at. There's probably stuff you're not going to be great at either. Let's work together to overcome that,
Exactly.
instead of either ignoring it, right? Well, nope, I'm perfect, or the other side, yeah, I totally suck, and I hope like hell you're good, because otherwise we're going to drown here, right? So I think that's great, man. I think that's really great advice, Todd.
Well, thank you. And really, the impotence behind this new book, and I don't know if impotence is a word.
Impetus.
I think I was close. So here's the thing. Back when I first got promoted, right? Like, I had been a salesperson forever. And then I was running sales ops at the time. But I remember being so excited about having this new responsibility, right? Like, yes, like finally I achieved my goal. And then like 48 hours later, I'm like waking up in a sweat going, wait a second. As a salesperson, I had a process, I had a structure. As a sales leader, I'm literally like a dog chasing a car down the street every morning, right? Like, I don't know where the car's going, but like one day it's a personnel issue, another day it's a pipeline issue, a deal issue, a board meeting, a forecast, a CEO one-on-one. Like, every day was just driven by whatever direction the car was going. And I'm too much of a nerd for that. Like, I couldn't do it. And so at the time, I created a structure for myself, right? Just a leadership structure. I took everything that I was responsible for and I boiled it down to 5 categories. And then over time, I added in all the behavioral science to optimize each one and made it alliterative because I'm too much of an idiot otherwise. So they all start when it became the 5 F's of building revenue capacity. And that's really the structure of what I've written here is, as a sales leader, stop being the dog chasing the car down the street. And now you're the car with the GPS on the inside, right? And like you can make turns, but once you have a structure internalized, you've put yourself out ahead of 99% of the rest of the sales leadership world. So you sound smart, and I could use all the help I could get. But it also allowed you to see the holes before they form and stop. Instead of chasing, you can really start to grow and grow your team. And that's that foundation. Like, here's the 5 F's. And we can talk really quick.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, right, there's a lot of F words that come up in sales.
Right. Yeah.
I want to be really clear here, right? So I've been in sales a long time too, man. And I think of lots of F words that come up. They're not focus, field, fundamentals, forecast, and fun, which is really interesting to me. So I will, I'll just say, when I lead, right, that last F though, that's where I try to lead.
Mhm.
I try to lead from fun too, but the fundamentals, okay, that totally makes sense, right? Oh yeah, forecast. Oh yeah, as a sales leader, duh, I got to be able to do that. But the other two, let's talk about those.
Mhm.
So first, field. What does that mean? Define field for us, Todd.
Well,
how we leverage that as a sales leader.
I'm going to flip that for a second because
okay, sure, go ahead.
Because the order matters with the first 3.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
So essentially, like, as you're taking over a new team, but even thinking about your existing team and growing it, like the 5 that Phil just rattled off there are the all of your responsibilities as a leader fall into one of those 5. And that first one is focus, meaning you as a sales leader have a responsibility to make sure that your team is leveraging the most important asset that they have, the most important inventory they have to turn into revenue, which is their time, right? So working the right opportunities at the right places with the right companies at the right size, at the right geos, at the right time. That's focus. I used to, as a sales leader, I had something I called a no science projects policy, right? Like, no science projects. Here's at Power Reviews, we sold to retailers and brands. There's all kinds of industries that use reviews. I forced our team to say no to all of them. Retailers, brands, like, that's where we are fantastic. That to your question about the field, then you establish your focus. Like, where is our sweet spot as an organization? The right companies, right places, right sizes, the right individuals within them. And then you build a field organization, like what team is taking the field every single day in terms of the right people with the right resources and the right tools. And the right people are, hey, we've got to make sure that we've got the people with the right backgrounds, right experiences, they're in the right places, we're paying them the right amount to go after that focus. And so that's field. And like I said, I had I had to make it alliterative because I'm an idiot. So field might be the one that's a bit of a force fit, but I kind of feel like when you think about like a sports analogy, like the team's taking the field, got to make sure you got the right team with the right equipment. And that's really your role, not only initially, but ongoing, is to make sure you got the right team on the field with the right equipment, the right tools, the right resources every single day. But it has to be based on the focus, not the other way
Okay, cool. Well, that's probably why I screwed it up. So that makes sense to me, right? No, and I would argue, right, the field might feel forced if if you haven't read the book, but once you read the book, right, it totally makes sense. So I definitely think, figure that out, gang. So if you're listening in, The Transparent Sales Leader, great book. Pick it up,
around. Thank you.
learn the 5 F's, right, from Todd. So let's go. Let's kind of wrap us up here, Todd, with motivation, because I think you spent a good amount of time on that in the book. Super important, super important. I love that you say the only time that it's true that sales reps are coin operated is if you're doing it wrong. So let's talk about that, man, because that's so often the case, right? So my sales reps want more money. They want more money. They need to get paid more. They need to get paid more. But you say that's when we're doing it wrong. So talk to me about that, Todd.
Well, yeah. I mean, if I have you over to my house and I'm like, hey, Phil, thanks for coming. Hey, will you go dig some holes in the backyard for me? I want to plant some bushes. You'd be like, screw
Probably
you.
not.
And I'm like, hey, I'll pay you $500 a hole. You might be like, hey, where's the shovel? But like that's being coin operated, right? That's the motivation required to do a job that we don't want to do, right? And that's why you see, I mean, I could go into a whole rant about the Great Resignation and what caused that, right? And a lot of it has to do with we really don't have the intrinsic inspiration that's tied to our organization, and we end up just chasing money. Now, there's again super nerd, but I created a structure around what actually constitutes intrinsic inspiration. There's 6 pieces that drive us every day to show up, to stay, to do our best, and to become advocates for our organization. And as a leader, like that's the category of fun that you mentioned, right? Fun is about building cultures where people are intrinsically inspired. That's your responsibility. And there's a structure that goes into it. I'll rattle that off quickly for you if you'd like. We as human beings, we do our best work when we can predict, right? Like when there's consistency, when we go to bed at night, we know what we're getting ourselves into the next morning. Like we sleep our best, we perform, we're creative, our IQ is at its highest. Unpredictability and inconsistency drives us crazy. And if you need any proof of that, go back to March of 2020, go to your local Costco and see people hoarding 2-ply toilet paper, right? Like uncertainty makes us do crazy things. So predictability is number 1. Number 2 is recognition. We do our best work as human beings when we're recognized for our efforts, when we're given status, validation, feedback, right? Like, and that again is part of your responsibility. The A is aim, meaning we do our best work when the aim of our work matters, right? Like, again, if my entire being as a salesperson is for you as the leader to achieve your targets, that's not very compelling, right? We do our best work when our work matters beyond our forecast. The I is independence. We as human beings do our best work when we've got a sense of independence, control, we're trusted, we're given the resources to do our best work. The S, we do our best work when there's safety and security, right? Security is that next one. When we're part of a pack, when we're part of a family, right? When we feel like people have our back. Again, as a leader, you've got a responsibility to that. And then the E is equitability, meaning we do our best work when the juice is worth the squeeze, when the rewards for the effort, our time, our resources are equal to those other 5 categories, right? Or those other categories. We do our best work when things are fair, and we do our worst work when we feel like others are paid more, paid less, or for the same effort, when other people are getting promoted over you. Like that is a huge killer of engagement and intrinsic inspiration. So that's the piece, right? That if all you're doing is motivating by pay, like I'll actually leave you with this explanation. You as a sales leader, if you create an environment where variable compensation becomes the reward for doing work we love to do instead of the reason we do it, that's when your team will stay, they will perform, and they will become advocates for you and your organization. And that's the key.
Wow. Wow. So say that one more time, Todd, because I think that's super important for folks to hear.
Yeah. If you create an environment where variable compensation is the reward for doing work we are intrinsically inspired to do instead of the reason we do the work, that's when you win. That's when your team stays, performs and becomes advocates for you and your organization. And that's the most successful companies I've ever been a part of. Man, there's been mission, there's been purpose, there's been predictability, there's been recognition, there's been security, there's been that family feel, and there's been equitability as a part of it too.
Awesome. Great stuff, Todd. Great stuff, man. Well, the book is fantastic. It's The Transparent Sales Leader. It's easy to read. Going to take a long time for folks to implement in a good way because there's a lot here. I mean, truly, I got to tell you, man, 200 pages, it flies. It's really, really quick to read. So congratulations with that. Yeah, no, you did a great job. So Todd, if there was one last thing though that people could use, maybe that you've already said, maybe that you have yet to say, to get started being a more transparent sales leader, what would that be?
I think at my core, and I said this earlier too, but stop feeling and acting as though A, you're perfect, and B, you're more important than your team. For me, you just have a different responsibility. We're all peers. And if we are there with cards face up and understand that at its core, I'm telling you, your team's going to want to run behind you. And that's the key to keeping turnover low and keeping performance high.
Love that. Awesome stuff, man. Well, Todd, you've got so much to give, man. You're sales historian on Twitter or on Instagram, right? I follow you there, and I'm like, man, this guy just knows a lot of stuff. ToddCaponi.com for getting to know you, and on LinkedIn, right? You're always giving great stuff there. LinkedIn.com/in/Todd Caponi. So, Todd, I appreciate you, man. This was great stuff today, friends. If you're listening, watching, get the book. Get smarter. You might call this the Sales Historian's Guide to Sales Leadership. It is really good. So go get a copy. And thanks again, Todd. I appreciate it.